in which growing maturity rekindles the relationship between one pair of lovers, and self-absorption carries another pair to the brink of death. Chapter 8. Alexei Alexandrovich, having come back from church, spent the whole morning at home. He was faced that morning with two tasks. First, to receive and send off to Petersburg a deputation from the racial minorities that was now in Moscow, and, second, to write the promised letter to the lawyer. The deputation, though invited on his initiative, presented many inconveniences and even dangers, and Alexei Alexandrovich was very glad to have found it in Moscow. The members of the deputation had not the slightest idea of their role and responsibilities, and they were naively convinced that their course consisted in explaining their needs and the true state of things and asking for government assistance, and they decidedly failed to understand that some of their statements and demands supported the hostile party and would therefore ruin the whole thing. Alexei Alexandrovich spent a long time with them, wrote a program from which they were not to deviate, and, after dismissing them, wrote letters to Petersburg for the guidance of the deputation. His chief assistant in this matter was to be Countess Lydia Ivanovna. She was an expert in dealing with deputations, and no one knew so well as she how to handle a deputation and guide it properly. Having finished that, Alexei Alexandrovich also wrote to the lawyer. Without the least hesitation, he gave him permission to act at his own discretion. In the letter he enclosed 3 notes from Vronsky to Anna, which he had found in the portfolio he had taken from her. Ever since Alexei Alexandrovich had left home with the intention of not returning to his family, and ever since he had seen the lawyer and told at least one person of his intention, especially since he had turned the matter of his life into a matter of papers, he had been growing more and more accustomed to his intention, and now saw clearly the possibility of carrying it through. He was sealing the envelope to his lawyer when he heard the loud sounds of Stepan Arkadyev's voice. Stepan Arkadyevich was arguing with Alexei Alexandrovich's valet and insisting that he should be announced. "It makes no difference," thought Alexei Alexandrovich. "So much the better. I'll declare my position regarding his sister now, and explain why I cannot dine with him." "Show him in," he said loudly, gathering up the papers and putting them into the blotter. "You see, you're lying. He is at home," Stepan Arkadyev's voice said to the lackey who had refused to let him in, and taking his coat off as he went, Oblonsky entered the room. "Well, I'm very glad I found you at home. So I hope," Stepan Arkadyevich began merrily. "I cannot come," Alexei Alexandrovich said coldly, standing and not inviting his visitor to sit down. Alexei Alexandrovich meant to enter at once into the cold relations he ought to have with the brother of a wife with whom he was beginning divorce proceedings, but he had not taken into account the sea of good-naturedness that overflowed the shores of Stepan Arkadyev's soul. Stepan Arkadyevich opened his shining, clear eyes wide. "Why can't you? What do you mean to say?" he said perplexedly in French. "No, you promised, and we're all counting on you." "I mean to say that I cannot come to your house because the family relations that existed between us must cease." "What? I mean, how? Why?" Stepan Arkadyevich said with a smile. because I'm starting divorce proceedings against your sister, my wife. I have been forced. But before Alexei Alexandrovitch had time to finish what he was saying, Stepan Arkadyevitch acted in a way he had not expected at all. Stepan Arkadyevitch gasped and sank into an armchair. "No, Alexei Alexandrovitch, what are you saying?" cried Oblonsky, and suffering showed on his face. "It's so. Forgive me, but I can't. I simply can't believe it." Alexei Alexandrovitch sat down, feeling that his words had not had the effect he anticipated, that it would be necessary for him to explain himself, and that whatever his explanations might be, his relations with his brother-in-law would remain the same. "Yes, I am put under the painful necessity of demanding a divorce," he said. "I'll tell you one thing, Alexei Alexandrovitch. I know you to be an excellent and just man. I know Anna, forgive me, I can't change my opinion of her, to be a wonderful, excellent woman, and therefore forgive me, but I can't believe it. There's some misunderstanding here," he said. "Yes, if only it were a misunderstanding. Excuse me, I do see," Stepan Arkadyevitch interrupted. "But, naturally, one thing, you mustn't be hasty. You mustn't be hasty." "I'm not being hasty," Alexei Alexandrovitch said coldly. "And one cannot take anyone else's advice in such a matter. I am firmly decided." "This is terrible," said Stepan Arkadyevitch with a deep sigh. "There's one thing I'd do, Alexei Alexandrovitch. I beg you to do it," he said. "The proceedings haven't started yet, as I understand. Before you start them, go and see my wife. Talk with her. She loves Anna like a sister. She loves you, and she's an amazing woman. For God's sake, talk with her. Do it out of friendship for me, I beg you." Alexei Alexandrovitch reflected, and Stepan Arkadyevitch looked at him sympathetically, without breaking his silence. "Will you go and see her?" "I don't know. That's why I didn't call on you. I suppose our relations must change." "Why so? I don't see it. Permit me to think that, apart from our family relations, you have for me, at least somewhat, the friendly feelings that I've always had for you, and true respect," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, pressing his hand. "Even if your worst suppositions are right, I do not and never will take it upon myself to judge either side, and I see no reason why our relations must change. But do it now. Come and see my wife." "Well, we have very different views of this matter," Alexei Alexandrovitch said coldly. "However, let's not talk about it." "No, why shouldn't you come? Why not tonight for dinner? My wife is expecting you. Please come. And above all, talk it over with her. She's an amazing woman. For God's sake, I beg you on my knees." "If you want it so much, I'll come," Alexei Alexandrovitch said with a sigh. And wishing to change the subject, he asked about something that interested them both. Stepan Arkadyevitch's new superior, not yet an old man, who had suddenly been appointed to such a high position. Alexei Alexandrovitch had never liked Count Anitchin before, and had always differed with him in opinion, but now he could not refrain from the hatred, comprehensible among locals, of a man who has suffered a fiasco in the service for a man who has received a promotion. "Well, have you seen him?" Alexei Alexandrovitch said with a venomous grin. "Of course. He came to our office yesterday. He seems to know his business perfectly, and is very energetic." "Yes, but at what is his energy directed?" said Alexei Alexandrovitch. "At getting things done, or at redoing what has already been done? The misfortune of our government is paper administration, of which he is a worthy representative. I really don't know what he can be faulted for. I don't know his tendency, but one thing I do know, he's an excellent fellow," Stepan Arkadyevitch replied. "I've just called on him, and really, he's an excellent fellow. We had lunch, and I taught him to make that drink. You know, wine with oranges. It's very refreshing, and remarkably enough, he didn't know it. He liked it very much. No, really, he's a nice fellow." Stepan Arkadyevich looked at his watch. "Heavens, it's past 4, and I still have to see Dolgorushin. So please do come for dinner. Otherwise you don't know how upset my wife and I will be." Alexey Alexandrovitch saw his brother-in-law quite differently from the way he had met him. "I've promised, and I will come," he answered glumly. "Believe me, I appreciate it, and I hope you won't regret it," Stepan Arkadyevich replied, smiling. And, putting on his coat as he left, he brushed the valet's head with his hand, laughed, and went out. "At 5 o'clock, and in a frock coat, please," he called out once more, coming back to the door. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.